The Carboniferous period, which lasted from about 359 to 299 million years ago, was a remarkable time in Earth's history. It was a time of lush forests, abundant coal deposits, and high atmospheric oxygen levels. It was also a time of giant insects, some of which had wingspans of up to 70 centimeters or 28 inches. That's about the size of a seagull. Imagine a dragonfly the size of a bird buzzing past your head, or a cockroach the size of a shoe scuttling across the floor. These were the rulers of the Carboniferous world, and they have fascinated scientists and the public alike for centuries. But how did these insects get so big? And why did they shrink later on? These are the questions that researchers have been trying to answer using a combination of fossil evidence, modern experiments, and computer models. So sit back and relax, because this episode's going to be interesting. I'm your host, Mr. Earth Guy, and you're listening to Earth SciShow. One of the most popular theories is that the high oxygen levels in the Carboniferous atmosphere, which reached about 30%, compared to today's 21%, allowed insects to grow larger while still meeting their energy needs. Oxygen is essential for life, but it can also be toxic in large quantities. Insects breathe through a system of hollow tubes called tracheae, which deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. The size and the shape of these tubes limit how much oxygen can reach the insect's cells, and thus how big the insect can grow. In a high oxygen environment, insects can have smaller tracheae and still have enough oxygen, leaving more room for other tissues and organs. This could explain why dragonflies, which have relatively large tracheae, grew bigger in the Carboniferous. But this theory is not without its problems. For one thing, not all insects were larger when oxygen was higher in the past. For instance, the largest cockroaches ever are skittering around today, and some insects, such as beetles and grasshoppers, actually decreased in size with higher oxygen atmospheres. For another thing, oxygen levels fluctuated throughout the Carboniferous and beyond, and the insect size did not always match these changes. For example, oxygen levels dropped significantly in the Permian period, which followed the Carboniferous, but insect size did not decline until much later in the Jurassic period, when oxygen levels rose again. So what else could have influenced insect evolution? Some researchers have suggested that other factors such as temperature, humidity, food availability, predation, and competition could have played a role in the shaping of insect size and diversity. For example, higher temperatures could have increased insect metabolism and growth rate, while lower humidity could have increased water loss and desiccation risk. Food availability could have affected insect nutrition and development, while predation and competition could have imposed selective pressures on insect behavior and morphology. To test these hypotheses, some scientists have conducted experiments on modern insects, raising them in different environment conditions and measuring their responses. For example, a recent study led by VandenBrooks and his colleagues at the Arizona State University showed that dragonflies grew faster and bigger in high oxygen atmospheres, while cockroaches grew slower and did not become large adults. They also found that the tracheal tubes of cockroaches were smaller in high oxygen environments, possibly as a way to avoid oxygen poisoning. These results suggest that different insect groups have different sensitivities and adaptations to oxygen fluctuations, and that the larval stages may be more vulnerable than adult stages. Another way to investigate the evolution of insects is to use computer models that simulate the physics and physiology of insect respiration and flight. These models can help eliminate the maximum possible size of insects under different oxygen levels and their constraints, such as wing loading, muscle power, and air density. They can also help reconstruct the flight performance and behavior of extinct insects, such as how fast they could fly, how agile they were, and how they cope with turbulence and wind. For example, a study by Robert Dudley and his colleagues at the University of California, Berkeley, showed that the giant dragonflies of the Carboniferous could fly faster and more efficient than modern dragonflies, but they were less maneuverable and more vulnerable to gusts and predators. They also suggested that the giant dragonflies may have used thermals and gliding to reduce the energetic cost of flight. But perhaps the most important factor that influenced the rate of giant insects was the evolution of their enemies. The Carboniferous was a time of low diversity and abundance of vertebrate predators, especially flying ones. The only vertebrates that could challenge the insects in the air were the pterosaurs, which were small and rare at the time. The insects had little to fear from the ground either, as most amphibians and reptiles were slow and clumsy. But this changed dramatically in the Mesozoic era, which began about 252 million years ago. This was the age of the dinosaurs, which dominated the land and the birds which conquered the sky. The birds, in particular, posed a serious threat to the insects, as they were fast, agile, and voracious. They could outcompete and outfly the insects, and they could prey on them with their sharp beaks and claws. The birds also had more efficient respiratory systems than insects, which gave them an advantage in low oxygen environments. It is no coincidence that the decline of the insect size and the diversity coincided with the rise of bird diversity and abundance in Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The reign of the giant insects was over, and the reign of the feathered dinosaurs had begun. The story of the giant insects is a fascinating one, full of mysteries and surprises. It reveals how the Earth's changing environments and biota have shaped the evolution of life over millions of years. It also reminds us of the diversity and the beauty of nature, and the importance of preserving it for future generations. Thank you for listening to this episode of Earth SciShow. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will join me again next time. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to this podcast. It really helps the channel. You've been listening to Earth SciShow, and I'm your host, Mr. Earth Guy. And remember, stay curious.